For years, I believed I had made peace with the past. But old wounds have a way of resurfacing, and nothing prepared me for the moment my parents stood at my front door, a door they never imagined I'd own. Their expressions told me everything. I was the son who deviated from their plan, the disappointment who hadn't followed in their footsteps. 17 years had passed since I last saw them, and I had come to terms with their absence. I thought they'd forgotten me, just as I had tried to forget them. But last Friday, as they stood on my doorstep, glancing around with disbelief, I realized things were about to get interesting. To understand this moment, we need to rewind to the day I turned 17, the day I told my parents I wouldn't be going to medical school. "You're what?" my mother asked, her voice trembling as if I'd confessed a crime. Summoning every ounce of courage, I repeated, "I'm not going to be a doctor. I want to pursue acting, maybe start a business." My heart pounded in my chest as I said the words I had rehearsed for months. My father scoffed, throwing up his hands. "Acting? Business? Is this a joke? Son, we're doctors." "It's in our blood. It's who we are." "But it's not who I am," I said, my voice cracking. "I don't want that life." I had hoped they'd listen, maybe even try to understand. Instead, my father's face hardened. "Then leave," he said coldly. "If you can't carry on the family legacy, you don't belong here." And just like that, my life changed. I was kicked out with nothing but $100, a bag of clothes, and no clear plan for the future. For months, I couch surfed, took odd jobs, and scraped by. Acting gigs were few and far between, but I refused to give up. Slowly, I built a small business, working tirelessly to create something of my own. Meanwhile, my siblings were on a conveyor belt to medical school, shipped off to the UK to pursue their destinies. My older brother, a celebrated neurosurgeon, became the family's pride. He earned accolades for groundbreaking work and a staggering salary. I, on the other hand, was the black sheep, the son who had failed. When my parents announced they were moving back to Sydney, I didn't expect much. They called occasionally, asking generic questions like "How are you?" but never once inquiring about my work or my life. They probably assumed I was barely scraping by. As expected, their focus was on my older brother. He had just secured a $750,000 a year surgical position, an achievement my parents celebrated endlessly. Meanwhile, they began house hunting in Sydney's prestigious northern suburbs, a market dominated by tech millionaires and old family wealth. Even as doctors, they quickly realized their dream homes were far out of reach. Properties in their desired areas started at $20 million, a price tag they couldn't justify. After a long day of disappointing viewings, my father sighed, shoulders slumping. "We'll have to settle for something smaller," he admitted reluctantly. "Or wait until prices drop," my mother added, clearly disheartened. I couldn't resist. "Why don't you come see my place before dinner?" I suggested, keeping my tone light. "It's nearby." They exchanged a look, amused. "Your place?" my mother asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. "Sure. Show us where you're staying." When we arrived, their expression shifted from curiosity to stunned disbelief. My house, a sleek, modern property with custom landscaping and a shimmering pool, stood proudly on a quiet lot. My father's brow furrowed as he took in the manicured lawn and elegant facade. "This is your place?" he asked, his voice laced with doubt. "Yeah," I replied casually, opening the gate. They followed me inside, their silence growing heavier as they took in the high ceilings, hardwood floors, and luxurious furnishings. My mother finally broke the silence. "How much do you pay to rent a room here?" she asked, her voice barely hiding her disbelief. "Rent?" I chuckled. "Mom, I don't rent. This house is mine." Their jaws dropped. For a moment, neither of them could speak. I couldn't tell whether it was the house itself or the fact that I owned it that shocked them more. Then, their initial surprise gave way to something darker. "This is how you've been living," my mother said sharply, her eyes scanning the room. "And you kept this a secret from us? After all these years?" "Kept it a secret?" I shot back, incredulous. "You never asked. You knew I struggled for years, living in a cramped apartment, and you didn't care. So why do you care now?" "Don't twist this around," my father barked, his voice rising. He gestured around the house. "What is this? Some show of defiance? Are you trying to rub your success in our faces with your questionable wealth?" I crossed my arms, refusing to back down. "Questionable? Seriously? No, Dad, I didn't get here through the shady means. I worked hard, built a business, and succeeded. Not that you'd know, you never bothered to ask." Their faces hardened, but before they could respond, my mother changed tactics. Her voice softened, almost pleading. "Well, clearly you're doing well," she said. "We'll stay here then. Not with your brother. We can't let people think we're living worse than our own son." I stared at her, stunned. Then, a bitter laugh escaped me. "Let me get this straight, you judge me, accuse me of God knows what, and now you want to move into my house." After 17 years of silence, they shuffled awkwardly, exchanging glances. My father cleared his throat. "You're our son," he said, as if that somehow explained their sudden change of heart. "We supported you as much as we could." I tilted my head, incredulous. "Supported me? You kicked me out when I needed you most. You invested everything in my siblings and left me to fend for myself. That was your decision." Silence hung in the air as I let my words sink in. "Then," I added, "honestly, you'd have a better chance living with my neighbors than with me." My father's face darkened, his jaw tightening. "Fine," he said, his voice low and laced with bitterness. "If that's how you feel, you're out of the will. Not a single penny for you." I shrugged, more amused than angry. "Oh no," I replied mockingly. "What will I do without the inheritance from parents who can't even afford to live in my neighborhood?" The words hit harder than I expected, and I saw their expressions shift from anger to helplessness. For a moment, no one spoke. My mother's voice finally broke the silence, barely a whisper. We just wanted the best for you." A pang of sadness stirred within me, but I quickly pushed it aside. "No," I said firmly. "You wanted what was best for yourselves. You wanted another doctor to carry on your legacy. But I built my own. And I've done just fine without you." My father scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. "Is that right? Well, when this little charade of yours falls apart, don't come crying to us. You'll regret pushing us away." I shook my head, incredulous. "Pushing you away? 17 years ago you pushed me away. All I've done is draw the line." Without another word, I opened the door, gesturing for them to leave. My mother hesitated, her lips trembling as though she had more to say, but my father stepped past her onto the porch. "You're making a mistake," he said, his tone menacing. "You'll regret this." I met his gaze, unflinching. "No," I said calmly. "I already made peace with it." They stood on the porch for a moment, as if expecting me to change my mind. My mother's eyes darted around, searching for something, perhaps a trace of the son they thought they knew. My father, on the other hand, looked as though he was trying to commit every detail of the house to memory, as if he still couldn't believe it was mine. Finally, with a resigned sigh, they turned and walked away. I stood in the doorway, watching as they disappeared down the path, their figures growing smaller with every step. A strange mix of emotions swirled within me: relief, sadness, and a faint sense of closure. For years I had wondered what it would feel like to see them again. I imagined reconciliation, apologies, or even a grudging acknowledgement of my success. But reality had been far different. Instead of pride, they offered suspicion. Instead of warmth, they brought entitlement. And instead of connection, there was only a deeper divide. As I closed the door behind me, I let out a long breath. The house was quiet now, and for the first time in years I felt truly at peace. I had built this life brick by brick, without their help, and their opinions no longer had the power to shake me. Their parting words echoed in my mind: "You're making a mistake. You'll regret this." But as I looked around the home I had worked so hard to create, I knew the truth. The only mistake I had made was ever doubting myself. They wanted me to follow their path, but I had chosen my own. And while it had been lonely and uncertain at times, it had led me here to a life I could truly call my own. 17 years ago, they had closed the door on me. Today, I had closed the door on them. This time, though, I wasn't walking away empty-handed. I had my dignity, my success, and the knowledge that I had proven them wrong, not for their sake, but for mine. As the sun set over the quiet neighborhood, I stood by the window, looking out at the world I had fought to claim. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer defined me. This was my life, my story, and I was finally free to live it.